President Macron is risking his government, really, to raise the retirement age. Successive Prime Ministers here have ruled out doing the same. Susan, why is this such a sensitive proposition, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, Macron is right that there are real pressures coming. And in New Zealand, we have buried our heads in the sand, and we're not talking about the different options. But every now and then, raising the age will come up. We should see all of the alternatives that there are, not just raising the age, but maybe changing the rate, which would be a great difficulty for those that are already struggling.
That's right. That's sensitive, isn't it?
And the other one is to revisit the idea of a clawback, so that we pay it to everybody at 65, but we make sure that those people in well-paid work who really don't need it at the moment can have it.
Okay, well, we'll talk about those particular options in a moment, but let's talk about how the pressures are really piling on now. We're at the beginning of the boomer retirement age, Shamubeel, and they're the richest generation in history. Have they and we failed to prepare ourselves for the oncoming boomer retirement avalanche?
Of course. The boomers wrote a blank check to themselves against their future generations. That's what welfare is. Superannuation is welfare for the poor who didn't save for it. And the reason why I'm a big supporter of raising the retirement age, or the eligibility age, is the chink in the armour.
What do you mean?
We have to start having the conversation that we cannot have a universal system of welfare for old people when we have child poverty, when we have infrastructure deficits, when we have refused to invest in the social and physical infrastructure.
But isn't the problem with that, and that's a political one, is that the boomers have signed up to a social contract where they expected age 65 to be eligible for universal superannuation.
The buggers should have saved for it.
That away from them.
The buggers should have paid for it. They should have saved for it. Why did they not save for it? It is an outrage. It's an outrage.
It's not about the baby boomers. We're all going to be 65 by 2030, and you don't raise the age overnight.
Yeah.
No, so it's not actually about the baby boomers.
It's not just about the baby boomers. Well, I mean, the baby boomers are the ones that Shamubeel was saying haven't paid for it, aren't saving for it.
Well, they're going to get it at 65.
Yeah, yeah. So what are you saying? It's about the next generation.
Yes, it is. They're the ones that will be affected by raising the age.
They're the ones who won't get it.
And they're the ones that won't get it, and they're the ones that are suffering at the moment.
Right, so that's like the Gen, I think it's me, isn't it? Gen Xers and the millennials, right?
Yes, and that's why we shouldn't be looking at raising the age as the only alternative.
Okay, all right, but people are living longer. We are healthier. Therefore, we should work longer. We should be able to work longer, and we don't necessarily need to have that money if we can work longer.
Well, we've got a basic income in place, which is a prototype, and it is respected around the world for what it does. And we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We want people to have that choice, and some people want to stop paid work at 65. It doesn't mean that they become unproductive. They're doing all sorts of other things, looking after grandchildren for one, and in paid work, of course.
So that's the unpaid economy you're talking
about?
Yes,
yes, and they can continue
So you're saying that needs to be supported?
So that needs to be supported.
Right.
But my fear is that by 2030, the baby boomers are going to enter the 85 plus age bracket, and then we're really going to see the fiscal pressures come on.
Yes, Shamubeel, I'm sure you want to jump in there.
I want to jump in because the work thing is a distraction.
Oh.
It's the wealth. The fact that we have people who have wealth in old age who are getting access to welfare payments. That's what super is. Super is welfare payments. We should not have welfare for rich people when we refuse to invest the same amount of money and the same universality for children living in poverty. Those are the trade-offs that we're making. We have a consensus across the political party that we will not raise taxes. Well, if that is the case, then we're going to have to decide where that money goes. I do not want that money going towards rich old people who did not save for it. I want it to go to young people.
Okay, what about the poor old people? Okay,
they should absolutely get it.
They should absolutely get it. So you're suggesting that
it's welfare.
So you are suggesting a system where you raise the age for the rich people, but not for the poor people. Is that what you're saying?
We should have means testing. Yes.
Means testing.
Yes, it should not be universal for all people who refuse to save for it. We have not invested and saved for the future of this country. We knew that aging is coming. You don't need an economist to tell you that people get older.
No.
We knew this was coming.
Yeah. But for some ethnicities, Māori in particular, I mean, they live a shorter period of time.
That is why we should have a more generous welfare payment for people who need it. We should not have a inadequate welfare system that does not actually, it's spread too thin. What's the benefit of giving this money to rich folk?
Yeah,
There is no
okay,
benefit.
but so therefore, should you have a lower superannuation entitlement age for certain ethnicities?
Oh, that would be just so complicated.
Would it?
What we've got is a really good model. Let's try and make it work.
All right, so how are we going to make it work? Give me two things how it's going to work.
Well,
How would you like it to work?
if we leave the age at 65, which we should, because of all the problems of people coming into retirement and not having fared so well in their late middle age, a lot of them have lost work and so are not well prepared. So there's all sorts of arguments why there's this big group you've got to keep supporting at 65.
Okay.
If we're going to make it universal, then we need a clawback at the top end, because as Shamubeel says, we can't afford to keep paying it to people who are super wealthy. It doesn't make sense. For intergenerational equity purposes, so that the younger generation can see it fair, they need those changes to come in pretty soon.
Okay. Shamubeel, what is your ideal version of superannuation eligibility?
Means testing.
Yep.
Raise the age over time, gradually over a period of 10 years, and close the gap between
what?
super and
What are
welfare.
you going to raise the age to?
70.
70.
Just do it over 20 years.
70.
We're living forever. But the problem is our welfare payments and super payments are so different. Unless we close the gap, the groups that you're talking about will continue to miss out. Most of those people will not live to that old age. So it's not fair that people who cannot work because their bodies have worn out can't enjoy the same benefits of retirement as other people who are healthy.
We've got to fix the welfare system
Exactly.
before we talk about raising
It is
the
both.
age at
It is
all.
both.
There's one other major problem here, and that's the ageing, because it's an ageing population. The younger population working base isn't there, is it, to support? I mean, we were looking at the figures, and there's like 7.3 working age individuals in the mid-70s, and that's going to be 2.7 in 35 years. I mean,
So
just
There's
isn't
going
the
to be
basic.
huge pressure on resources, particularly labour-intensive services such as health, old age care, those sorts of things. And we have to be very careful that we are not looking after the wealthy old at the expense of those poorer older people who really will need support, and the younger generation.
So it's a nuanced solution. You're both talking
Yes.
about a nuanced solution,
Yes.
whether you raise it or not. What about the amount at the moment? So, I mean, if your eligibility at the moment is $467 for a single person per week, but that assumes that you have a mortgage-free home,
Yes.
and home ownership is falling away. Do we need to raise that?
Well, there is a problem of hardship amongst those that are renting over the age of 65, and that would suggest that there was a case for a more nuanced accommodation supplement. At the moment,
Right.
people over 65 cannot get any assistance if they have over 8,100 in the bank.
Okay, so that's a very low base there.
And that was set in 1988. So there's all sorts of problems.
Things have changed since 1988.
We want people to be poor before we will help them, right?
Right.
We make them poor, and then we
Yes.
blame them for being poor, and then we say, well, isn't it sad that you're poor?
Well, we just did a story with Thomas Mormosea, who is the working poor at the moment,
Totally.
okay? And, I mean, he's likely to lose his job. He's the working poor, but there's the retired poor that you're talking about as well.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that's increasing.
And that's increasing.
Because of the housing situation, largely.
But this
Okay.
is why we cannot afford to keep subsidizing rich people who don't need it. We need to make it much more generous for people who actually need it, and actually give them some dignity in old age. Because fundamentally, our purpose of welfare is to give people dignity. We're not doing that. Our welfare system actually does not give people dignity when they're on it.
We're just going to wrap this up, but because of the cost of the ageing population, both health and superannuation spending, it's a really critical, as you both say, long-term issue. Why is it always being kicked to touch, Susan?
Because of our history. You only need to go back to the 80s and the 90s to see how fraught the whole thing was. We had an accord, it fell apart. We had the surcharge, it was abandoned.
But is that history, Shamubeel, really...
It is power asymmetry. It's people who see a benefit to themselves and they don't want to give it up. Even though they haven't paid for it, they haven't saved for it, they don't deserve it. They wrote themselves a blank check and they're bloody well going to cash it regardless. And they will use the political system to make it happen.